I think Terence Crawford is the best boxer ever, and I think he beats everyone. So I made a video similar to this about a year ago as to why Terence Crawford is the best active boxer right now, but since then he's gone on to beat every big name in boxing comfortably and has just announced his retirement. Now that he's retired, I think it's fair to start comparing him to the best boxers in history. A few names come up in the GOAT conversation, and in this video I'll be comparing Crawford to these guys to prove to you why I think he has the best resume and is the most complete fighter stylistically in the history of boxing. Before we begin, if you haven't already, then don't forget to subscribe because it really helps the channel out. In order to compare Crawford to boxers from other eras, we need to start by setting some rules. The first thing we need to get out of the way is who wins. When I bring up a boxer, we'll be going through their skill set and how Crawford would deal with them. Of course, this is theoretical, but we can still come to a logical conclusion whilst being fair. The next rule is that these theoretical matchups will be done over 12 rounds. A lot of the older fighters we'll be talking about are from the 15-round era. I think it's only fair that we compare how fighters would do under 12 rounds because that's how boxing works now. The final rule is that the boxers I'll be comparing Crawford to have to be similar size. This means heavyweights like Muhammad Ali or featherweights like Willie Pep won't be on this list. This is because I want to compare fighters who have similar physical dimensions, similar weight, similar size, because it's the only way to judge fairly. If we stopped talking about skills and ignored weight classes, this video would stop being about who's better and would just be who's bigger. With that out of the way, let's move on to who the best boxer of all time is. And because my pick is Terence Crawford, let's go through what gives him the toughest challenges. We'll be going chronologically, so we'll start with the classic boxers era. This will include boxers before the 1960s. We have guys like Carmen Basilio, Kid Gavilan, and Sugar Ray Robinson, all-time greats. This video will probably trigger a lot of hardcore boxing fans, but the reality is Crawford takes these guys apart with relative ease. These guys are highly respected because they made the sport what it is today, but boxing is a sport that grows and improves. Guys are constantly coming up with new techniques and groundbreaking training methods, and although these guys would be entertaining to watch today, they would probably be beaten at the elite level. It would be like taking basketball players from the 1950s and trying to make them compete against NBA players today. I want to quickly single out Sugar Ray Robinson because I think he would have given Terence Crawford his toughest test. In terms of resume, Sugar Ray Robinson is probably one of the most accomplished boxers of all time, having become the first boxer to win a world title 5 times. He was a fighter of the year twice, once in 1942, then 9 years and 90 fights later in 1951. He's done everything possible in boxing, and pretty much every renowned organization in boxing has him as the greatest fighter of all time, with the Ring magazine listing him as the best. He had incredible power, exceptionally high ring IQ, masterful footwork, and otherworldly skills. That being said, although Robinson was leagues above everyone in his era, Crawford is another level. Although they were both around the same weight, Crawford has physical advantages like reach, and he was probably in better condition because nutrition and training protocols are much better now. I think Crawford would have found a way to catch Robinson after adjusting to his style for a few rounds. Crawford also has a head start in knowledge because all of the groundbreaking discoveries that Robinson made during his era have become a fundamental part of boxing today. Crawford would have been too much for Robinson and probably would have been showing him things he's never seen before in the ring. This massive 70-year gap in the sport would have been too much, but it still would have been a fun fight to watch. Now we get into the golden age of boxing with the 4 kings: Sugar Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran, Thomas Hearns, and Marvin Hagler. I thought it would be perfect to have these guys sum up the 70s onwards because they dominated the middleweight and welterweight divisions and are known as the all-time greats who defined their era. If there was anyone that could represent that time, it would be these guys. Let's look at how each of these guys are individually and see how they match up against Terence Crawford. Starting off with Sugar Ray Leonard, who famously started his career by winning a gold medal at the Olympics before winning world titles in 5 weight classes as a professional. He was a great all-around fighter who had incredible hand speed and power. He could use his fluid movement and footwork to pick you apart on the outside and could finish you off with dazzling combinations from close range. Still, he had his weaknesses like getting caught on the ropes and had a tendency to get drawn into inside fights like when he lost to Duran in their first fight. I think Crawford would be able to cut him off in the later rounds and work him on the inside like Duran did. This brings us onto the next king, Duran, who definitely poses one of the toughest challenges for Crawford. His knowledge of inside fighting and ability to read punches, especially punches from boxers as fast as Leonard, make him extremely dangerous to deal with, but he had his flaws as well. Duran had an unnaturally small reach, with his reach being 168 centimeters when he's 170 centimeters tall. If he's not able to get on the inside, he can get picked apart from the outside, similar to to how Thomas Hearns was able to open him up with jabs before cracking him with a chopping right. I think Crawford would be able to pick him off with his jab and would be able to slowly break him down and would probably knock him out similar to how Thomas Hearns did. This brings us on to probably the most dangerous opponent for Crawford on this list, the Motor City Cobra, Thomas Hearns. For those of you who don't know Thomas Hearns, he was a tall, slender boxer with unnaturally long arms and broad shoulders, which culminated to him having a ridiculous reach. He was able to make welterweight and would use his large physique to conquer 5 weight classes. He was also the first boxer to win world titles in 5 divisions. Despite his skinny appearance, he was called the Hitman for a reason. He had a sharp and stinging jab combined with a cannon for a right hand. He was known for being a devastating puncher even in the latter part of his career at cruiserweight. He's also ranked 18 on the Ring Magazine's list of 100 greatest punchers of all time. His physical attributes and strengths definitely make him dangerous for Crawford to deal with, because Crawford is used to being the longer fighter, but Crawford is also skilled at getting in on the inside and knocking people out, like how he dealt with Sean Porter. He's also able to do this from both stances. I think because of his repertoire of skills, he would start out by having a hard time against Hearns, but in the later rounds would probably be able to get Hearns' timing. Hearns also had somewhat of a questionable chin, with 4 out of 5 of his losses coming from knockout, so I think Crawford would be able to find the money shot later, but would need to be careful to not get caught early, because the early rounds is when Hearns is still fresh and when he poses the most danger. And finally, we have Marvelous Marvin Hagler. Hagler was probably the most similar to Crawford, seeing as they were both long switch hitters, but it was undeniable that Hagler was probably the most well-conditioned fighter of all time. He's easily stronger and fitter than Crawford, which enables him to pose the toughest challenge for Crawford. I still think Crawford would come out on top because all of the advancements and techniques that Hagler created for switch hitting were done almost 60 years ago. All the tricks and skills Hagler had are now a part of Crawford's fundamental skills. He has a 60-year advantage over Hagler, and for this reason, I think he would have been able to read Hagler and score points to win a decision. I don't think he stops Hagler because no one stops Hagler. This guy was only ever dropped once in his career, and that was a slip. The best strategy would be to win a decision over 12 rounds by catching him and scoring points from the outside and tying up to clinch on the inside. I think Crawford's modern skill set and techniques are enough to get past Hagler's supreme conditioning and ability. Now we're on to the modern era, which will be the 80s onwards. I want to quickly go over some of the best boxers we've seen who I think would have given Crawford a hard time. Starting off with an all-time great, Oscar De La Hoya. He won a gold medal at the Olympics before turning pro and winning 11 world titles in 6 weight classes. Oscar's strengths came from the fact that he had incredible technical skill, speed, and raw power. He was naturally left-handed, but instead of fighting southpaw, he was converted into an orthodox, which resulted in him having one of the best left hooks in history. That being said, Oscar still had weaknesses. He tended to fade in the later rounds like we saw in his fight against Felix Trinidad, and despite having incredible volume and combinations, he lacked great power. I think Crawford would have been able to get hold of his speed and catch him in the later rounds, and I honestly think Crawford stops him past the 8th or 9th round when Oscar starts to fade. Another great who was in the same era as Oscar De La Hoya would be Pernell Whitaker. Whitaker was a 4-weight world champion, having won world titles in lightweight, light welterweight, welterweight, and light middleweight. In 1989, he was crowned Fighter of the Year and currently holds the longest unified lightweight championship reign in boxing history at 6 title defenses. He was a master of the Philly shell and in his prime was regarded as untouchable. He had perfect timing on his counterpunching and an incredible ability to read opponents and frustrate them. His biggest weakness, however, was that he lacked power. He had a tendency to rely heavily on defense and evasion, which caused a lot of his fights to be close or controversial. He just doesn't have the power to pose a threat to Crawford, and for this reason, I think Crawford would be able to score points and win the decision over Whitaker, but it would definitely be a close fight. Manny Pacquiao is one of the greatest fighters of all time who dominated boxing in his prime. He's the only 8-division champion in boxing, having won 12 major world titles overall. He was relentless with blazing speed and exceptional footwork. He's one of the fastest southpaws of all time, blitzing his opponents and creating angles for his devastating left hand, which he called Manila Ice. His exceptionally high volume resulted in world champions getting smothered and crumbling under pressure, but he still had his own weaknesses. Due to his tendency to rush in and blast, he had a serious vulnerability to counterpunches like we saw against Juan Manuel Marquez, who managed to catch him coming in with the perfect right hand. I think Manny would have had success with Crawford at the start of the fight when Crawford is still unfamiliar with Manny's speed, but as the fight goes on, I think Crawford would be able to start counterpunching as Manny enters and may even be able to stop him in the later rounds. And finally, we have Floyd Money Mayweather. Now this is the first fight where I genuinely don't know who could win. Floyd Mayweather Mayweather retired undefeated after winning 15 world titles in 5 weight classes. He's achieved the highest level of mastery over the Philly shell, allowing him to seamlessly roll, slip, and block punches thrown from any angle. He's an exceptionally gifted counterpuncher who has incredible timing and has made some of the greatest champions of his time look like complete amateurs. He has very few weaknesses, and to this day no one was really able to exploit them, so it's hard to say how this fight goes, but there were some holes in his game. He struggled against boxers who are capable of putting constant pressure with high volume attacks like Marcos Maidana or Oscar De La Hoya. That being said, he still made them look like beginners. He did, however, struggle against highly skilled southpaws. Some of his hardest fights, like his fight against Manny Pacquiao, showed this because southpaws present a unique challenge that requires him to make adjustments to his Philly shell. An advantage for Crawford is that he does have a slight reach advantage that, combined with his ability to switch southpaw, may provide him with the necessary tools to have some success over Floyd. But Floyd also had an uncanny ability to adapt to fighters mid-fight. He may lose a round, then come back with a completely different strategy to pick you apart. There is also the fact that Terence Crawford is very strong for his weight, being able to stop physically powerful boxers like Sean Porter and Errol Spence Jr. This advantage in strength would also play a part in the fight because he would have what it takes to pressure Floyd. The Floyd fight is the only fight where I'm not completely sure who wins, but against every other boxer in history, I think pound for pound, Terence Crawford is number one. Let me know in the comments where you guys have Terence Crawford, and are there any boxers you think could beat him in a matchup?